Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you might be. I am Nicole BC, and you know everything. I had a crazy realization yesterday. Hello, how are you? And I wanted to share it with you. I have never considered myself to be a perfectionist. If you've been paying any attention, I think I talk about this probably more often than I'd like to admit, which is probably why I had this realization the other day. I'm just checking my sound right now. Okay, I think we're okay. And let me just check my microphone because I always have problems. Yeah, I think we're good. It's all acting like this is happening. Thank you for that. Thank you. I'm trying, Shannon. And actually, case in point, because I've always been a done is better than perfect kind of gal, and my shit is a little sloppy. There are lots of typos, but I've just been in this place where quantity truly has exceeded quality, and I've been okay with that. I am kind of behind the scenes. I don't really give a shit who gets the credit. Like, not only am I a done is better than perfect, I don't want to say ends justify the means, because that can often be like misinterpreted, but I don't really care how it gets done. I'm like a big iterate and improve kind of person. I don't expect it to be perfect, so on and so forth, right? At least this is everything I've been telling myself for the last 40 something years, 45. And I had this aha moment in challenging myself to be a better writer, challenging myself to be a better creator, challenging myself to push my podcast episodes and my quality to a whole new level, that perhaps I am such a hardcore perfectionist. I've actually never let myself even try, because my standards are so astronomically unreachable that I've not allowed myself to even attempt to create on the level that I think I should, air quotes, because it's impossible. So I've just never done the damn thing. Okay. And the fact that I want to throw up all over the place and projectile vomit it's a strong indicator I'm probably on to something here, right? Now, I've talked a lot about perfectionism as a limitation, and what I'm exploring with you today is the pursuit of quality, the blessing of perfectionism. And yeah, sure, it can be a curse. We've all talked about that, right? Like, I've got a podcast episode for that. Go listen to it if you are still struggling with even getting a thing out there. I've got the damn thing out there. I told somebody once that I was struggling with this, and they were like, "Oh, or do you struggle with commitment? Do you never finish what you start?" And I was like, "No, I start everything I say I'm going to, and I finish it." And they were like, "Oh, well then is it about perfectionism? Like, is it just never good enough?" And I was like, I mean, yeah, but the opposite of what you're thinking, right? Like, my standards are so insanely high, my expectations will never be met. Therefore, I am always disappointed in my own work. And rather than it becoming an iterate and improve, it's something that I refuse to even look at, let alone learn from. And that's just me. I wanted to break my brain. And so I gave myself this episode to really dive deep into what would it look like to undertake a new project, of which I've done several in the last couple of weeks because I'm alive again. Thank you very much. What if the heartbreaking rush of inevitable disappointment of trying to just simply impress myself, let alone anyone else, and quite frankly, I don't do this for anybody else. I wish I did. That would probably help as well. But what if my perfect perfectionism is what makes it hard for me to get out of bed every morning? And how can I circumnavigate that? So I'm going to share this little deep dive and this aha moment with you today. Thank you. Thank you for being here, friend. The question being, what truly drives you? And if this need for perfection, or we can dress it up nobly as this pursuit of quality control, if that's something that you've wrestled with, and maybe it's shown up more like the constant frustration of being disappointed, the expectation that it's never good enough. I mean, I think we're all somewhere on this spectrum, right? And I've never met anybody that is 100% satisfied 100% of the time. We're all probably wondering, how could this be better? How could I have done better? How could they have done better? What would better even look like? So let's look at this paradox, right? This spectrum that we find ourselves on, and ask ourselves, how can we achieve a level of quality that is both satisfactory and inspiring, in the sense that it is an optimal place to iterate and improve from, but it is also ready to send. So how can we strive for greatness without cursing ourselves to not just disappointment, but mediocrity, which I feel like I might have been floating around in. We all are our harshest critics. So I'm not looking for any kind of like validation here, or like, no, you're doing a great job. No, thank you. You just being here validates me all that I need. So we're going to talk about the 4 stages of mastery. And this is not from some psychological study or from some Harvard Business Review. This is just based on my work with creators and disruptors and change makers and game board designers, right? So this also isn't just about 10,000 fucking hours. There's some really interesting reviews that have been going on about that as well, because it's not just, and we talked a little bit about this in the time episode, time as a construct. It's not just checking the box of 10,000 hours, which is ultimately showing up like 40 hours a week for about 10 years, right? Yeah, sure. If you do anything for 10 years, you're going to have a degree of performance within it, right? But like, there's a big difference between just like showing up and doing the dang thing and like giving it your optimal level of performance. Again, we talk about that in Time as a Construct episode, but it's not just about 10,000 hours. And I know you know this because I know you've envied these people, but some people just wake up one day and it's as if they've spent 10,000 hours doing it. And how the fuck did that happen? So we'll talk about these stages that we all go through when we are attempting to show up like the master, like the person who has spent 10,000 hours doing it. We will explore how to let go of perfectionism and why it doesn't mean you have to let go of quality, but in redefining your definition of perfect, you can create space for this profound and unique creation that thrives despite the fact it can also be improved upon. And finally, we will talk about a couple of takeaways that holds this paradox of perfectionism in a much more sort of nurturing, creative, and playful space, so that you can change your approach to your work and your output, and perhaps, and maybe finally, understand what perfect means for you and how it can feel supportive and encouraging instead of so fucking scary you don't want to get out of bed every day. So let's just get, the tough stuff out of the way first. Why perfectionism feels like a trap. I mean, it's pretty obvious. It is a double-edged sword. On one side, it does drive us to produce and improve and refine and reach for excellence. And it paralyzes us. It makes us hypercritical of others' work and potentially our own, most definitely our own. And this will stall your progress. This will leave you stuck in this endless loop of not good enough. And we talked a lot about this in that Quantum Business Book Club Presence discussion by Amy Cuddy. It's one of my favorites. Imposter phenomenon, imposter syndrome, truly defined by this concept of perfectionism. A study published, and I know I said no studies and data, but this is just to prove the point that we're making here in this the hard, ugly part of this conversation. The Psychological Bulletin in 2018, a research study done by Dr. Thomas Curran and Dr. Andrew Hill. You know it's good because it was done by doctors, am I right? It found that perfectionism increased significantly over the past 30 years, particularly amongst the youth. Why? Because we now have the data to defend. We have this wild litmus test for quality, and it's what we see online. And the biggest challenge with that, and I know you know this, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but we're comparing ourselves to output that involved resources we simply do not have access to on the input side. So when you're looking at your podcast or your video or art or words and you don't have a team behind you, you don't have a decade's worth of literal experience or someone paying you to learn, and you wonder why you don't have what you perceive as being their results, which you actually have no idea about. Yeah, perfectionism is going to run fucking wild at like on an insane level. Perfectionism is linked to higher rates of burnout, anxiety, and depression. No shit. It's also correlated to higher performance in creative and academic tasks. So it's not all bad. It's how we approach it. Have you ever worked so hard on something, trying to make it quote unquote perfect, only to find out that despite it being phenomenal, you have leached and sucked the joy out of that end result because it nearly fucking killed you? And that's the problem with burnout, right? Like once you push yourself to that place, you're too exhausted on the other side of it to enjoy whatever has come of it. And you can never get there again because your subconscious mind, your nervous system is like, oh, hell no, not worth it. Don't matter that we got there. We fucking killed ourselves, literally killed ourselves trying to do it. And now we can't, so we won't. Letting go of this need for perfectionism is how you heal this wound. Once again, very paradoxical. We redefine the concept of perfect in order to attempt perfection in the first place. Something magical happens when you free yourself to embrace the quirks, the flaws, and the imperfections that make your work uniquely yours. You have heard me do this 1,100,000 times because this is especially true in creativity and creative work and in the making of art. I mean, so often it is the mistake that leads to something really fucking cool, but I'll excuse myself by checking my sound and checking my video. I will say this feels awkward, or I'll apologize if I jumble my words. I am recognizing that these imperfections might also make this accessible, relatable, entertaining. It could also be just really annoying. The disclaimers that I offered when I first started recording podcasts were like a lot. And it also gave me permission to create in the first place. I recognize this is going to be messy. I mean, I think I literally told myself it's never going to be as bad as this. You're just getting started and you got to start somewhere. I think I've raised my production value significantly, and also it has a lot more to go. Yet here we are. Thank you. Did I have another study, even though I said I wasn't going to have any studies? I do. Neuroscience. A study in 2020 by some neuroscientists called Creativity Research, published in the Creativity Journal of Research, found that self-compassion and acceptance improved creative output by reducing cognitive rigidity. Oh, I forgot about this whole rabbit hole that I went down here. Okay, sorry. That's why everything got a little bit jumbled. Well, because I was trying to not use studies, but I did find a study, and then this study pointed to this philosophy that comes out of this way of thinking that comes out of Japan called wabi-sabi. And I looked up that pronunciation as well. You're welcome. Highly recommend going down this rabbit hole, by the way. I think we're all pretty familiar with that Japanese style of pottery where if things break, it is mended with gold. And that is a different frame of thought. Wabi-sabi is the art of finding beauty in imperfection. And from memory, and I am butchering this, so don't at me on it, but wabi is beauty and sabi is old and weathered, if you were to look up the literal translation. But it is the unpolished truth of creation. It is that in its imperfections are its beauty. Did I use those? I might have. In the imperfections is its beauty. Anywho, the point being, this concept I think is inherently embraced by artists and creatives, but I wonder how you could embrace it, that it is actually the imperfections that make it perfect. Because without those idiosyncrasies, those things that make it you and yours, it would just be really fucking boring and like everybody else, right? So think about a moment when you've been really focused on what it is that you're doing, especially if we think about it in this concept of improving, right? And when you just go, I don't know how, but I'm committed to making this better, and you let that process just unfold or potentially unravel. How did you feel in those moments? I don't want to tell you how you felt, but I can feel you smiling, right? Like it's a loaded question, but the idea being when you get all your arts and crafts out, or you realize that meeting's just canceled and you actually kind of have this hour ahead of you, and you go, well, what could I really do with this? Without having an agenda, we just approach that activity differently than when we think about it. We start at the end and go, this needs to be perfect. So what do I change? What do I undo? How do I belittle or berate myself in this process? Which I think is that's certainly how I've approached improvement. It's like, well, what went wrong? And how is that my fault? This is more like, what if it's just doing for the sake of doing? And I don't know what's going to happen on the other side of this. We've all experienced a mistake resulting in a better take, if you will. And there's something about that repetition that creates this improvisational, experimental approach. I'm going to talk about some artists because they're always very well known and often brag about this approach in their own work. But Chick Corea, Bela Fleck, if you don't know, both of these people are, in their circles, considered the best. And they sort of exemplify this balance of being the best at what they do, but having this incredibly playful and improvisational and experimental approach to their work. And it resulted in a body of work that if you hear music, you know if it's Chick Corea playing. It could be a song that people have covered 1,000 times, but even if someone else is playing what he has written, you know that that's how he would construct a particular melodic line. Same with Bela and how Bela approaches his own playing. There's a way that these two have approached their art that is undeniably their own. And that only came from this ability to really play with it and mess it up and start to almost build these different connections within their brain. That's like, this is how we interpret and therefore output music. And both of them talk about, it's this idea of letting go, this rigidity, this expectation. And when we can let that perfect way of playing go, it allows this flow, this very natural output that is both uniquely their own and the best. Now people emulate their performance and their musicianship and their melodic structures, even though it kind of could be also described as like sloppy or incorrect. And I find that paradox fascinating. And another musician, obviously that's where my experience comes from, so it lended itself particularly well, not just to this particular podcast episode, but my own contemplations around perfection. So having been in the studio a lot, and you recognize based on the different players and people in the room's experience level and potentially who's responsible for this project and who's paying for it, like there is a goal, right? We essentially need to capture a recording here. And you'll often just let people play the first take, right? The first song all the way through, whether it's their own individual part or they're playing it live. You'll often do a live recording just to kind of get everybody loosened up a little bit and then to create a track to record against. And a musician who was notorious for both their perfectionism and their music is Jeff Beck. And he was famous for recording 20 to 30 different takes of a particular song and then almost always going with that demo, that first take. And there's a couple different arguments about why that would happen. But the point being, there's something about that first no holds barred, just get it out, let's see where we go from here, that can also be really magical. Again, Paradox. He would play it 30 times and record every single one of those takes, thinking that he'd get somewhere better for that pursuit of quality and excellence, but then always go back to the first one. And no shame in that game. A lot of people might go, oh my God, we just wasted a week in a studio trying to do this. But you capture the magic of that one track, and that track is then replayed for decades posthumous. I mean, was that a waste? I think we know the answer to that question. So I talked to you about the 4 stages of mastery. Again, not based on any scientific research, but just my own observations and experience. So let's just kind of talk about what I meant by that. To let go of perfectionism, you first have to understand this journey. And it is a journey. Another quantum business book club book that I highly recommend. Do I have it behind me? No, oh yeah, I do. The Artist's Journey, Stephen Pressfield. Anywho. When you recognize I am on a path, and on that path, there will be replicable experiences, patterned challenges, and rewards. And when I can recognize those for what they are, just indicators of where I'm at on my journey, I can then engage in this behavior. I can hold this paradox in a way that becomes less blamey, shamey, judgmental, and more just an understanding of the process. And the lucky few who were truly able to not just recognize it's a journey, but to walk that every dang day, and every time they pick up a creative project, recognizing the journey within that. And what Stephen Pressfield would argue, and the artist's journey, is every single thing an artist or someone who defines themselves as a creative does, whether it's making their freaking coffee in the morning or writing their magnum opus, it is the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell's infamous hero's journey. So first step, unknowing ignorance. You just don't know how to do it at all. So how the fuck are you supposed to start if you don't know how to do it? You just try. So you have no idea if you're good, if you're bad. You're just doing it for the sake of doing it. Blissful, naive enthusiasm. And this is where we all start. And it's funny. I felt like the story was worth sharing, and so I'm just going to share it now. It's definitely worth sharing. I just didn't know if this was like the right moment to share it. But I noticed when I started I'd been working in music for a couple of years. I was in the office. I was in the industry, the business side of things, right? And for a long story, not part of this particular story time, one of my old interns was now doing production at a venue, and they said, I was bitching about like being behind a computer. I think at this point I'm like 20 years old. I've been working full time for 2 years. I might have been 21 actually. Yeah, time. Anywho, bitching about how I just asked for some time off once I graduated, and I'd hoped to take a couple weeks, and my boss told me, no, we can't lose you for that long. And I was like, I'm not going to be stuck behind a computer for the rest of my life. And he was like, well, why don't you like see what's happening with your music? Like everything you do from behind the screen, like why don't you get into a venue, and like you should intern for me at the venue and just experience live sound. And like most things that I do, I show up, I fall in love with it. I wholly commit myself to it. So now I'm working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And then I'm working at this venue from 6 to 2 every night. And I was there for bumping. So the bands would show up. I would help them with their gear. I'd set up their gear. I'd mic all their gear, get it all happening, sound test. And that was the majority of my job. And then I could stay to reverse that process at the end of the night. And so, of course, I did because I'm a workaholic. Anyhow, or I was at that time. And I would notice as the bands started to show up that some of these artists would act as if they were the big dick in the room, and they would be demanding. They would have all these like, could you pull out 420 hertz from the guitar amp? And it's like, okay, dude. And they bossed everybody around, and they just had this like air and attitude about them. And then I would notice some people show up who would just kind of stand at the back of the room, usually with like their own little coffee cup or teacup, just kind of sitting there, just kind of getting a vibe. They usually felt a little bit older, a little bit wiser. They just had this calmness about them. And at some point they'd get on stage, maybe, and, do a few things and just be like, sounds great, man. Thanks. And that was it. And after enough nights of this, I realized that old person who everything just was good was usually the headliner. And really fucking good at what they did. And the people who made all of these crazy demands and acted like they were these experts were often the opening band. And they had no fucking idea what they were doing or how to play their instruments. And it didn't matter what frequencies the sound engineers pulled out of their mix, they still sounded like ass. And what I realized is that the newbies, the people at this very beginning stage, the you don't know what you don't knowers, were acting like they were at the end of their journey, and they were pretending to be something they were not. And that insecurity was both deeply felt, but also deeply experienced when they made their art. And I share this only because you are going to pretend when you first get started. It is part of the bravado, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the bullshit it takes to get yourself to even do the dang thing. And you're probably going to look at the people who inspired you to do it in the first place as examples and potentially even emulate them. So I don't mean to say like, don't be a dick when you first get started, but just recognize like there is something to that part of that journey that is inherently insecure. And the only way past is through. I think that was all the point that I really wanted to make with that. That was the end story time. Okay, so first stage, unknown ignorance. Second stage, known ignorance. I should probably come up with like better terms for this if I'm going to pretend like this is the 4 stages of mastery. Anywho, known ignorance is when reality sets in. This is the support band, the band that got to tour with the headliner, that were like going over every single fucking note that got played and like stagemanship and performance and like how the crowd is reacting, and they're like so fucking in their heads about it. But it's when you realize how much you don't know and how far you have to go on your journey, and it is overwhelming and it is defeating, and it is where perfectionism absolutely shows up. And most people quit here for very obvious reasons. But this is where the real growth begins. This is where you actually get to start iterating and improving. Because when you first get started, you don't even know. You don't even know. It is blind spots and bravado and bullshit galore, right? But now you know. Now you know you're entering the dark night of the soul, and you don't know when you're going to be coming out of it. And it is going to be trials and tribulations and foes and failures and good fucking luck. This is the part where we've all been. And when you think this is it, I've finally made it, and then you get knocked down again, you get up again. Yeah, it's where you want to fail fast, you want to fail furiously, you want to fail forward if you're in the startup industry, right? But it is what makes your journey epic. It's where you discover your own resilience. And this is where you start to discover your own style and the way you do things. And it will look like mistakes. It will feel like failure and defeat. It'll be embarrassing. And how you cope with that is exactly what will get you through to this next stage. I'm not going to throw in another story time. I have some notes there, but we're just going to keep on keeping on here. So third, we had unknown ignorance, then we had knowing ignorance. Now we have unknowing greatness. After putting in the work, after emerging from this dark night of the soul, the cave and the hero's journey, you have earned a certain level of skill and experience. And when you combine the two, we start to integrate and develop our own wisdom. You start producing high quality results without realizing just how great they are. And you're focused on just this continual path of improvement. And you don't appreciate the growth and the skills you've earned along the way. I talk about this, and I'm in this moment right now of chop wood, carry water, head down, butt up. You stop doing it for the validation. You probably lose sight of the payday. You just can't not do the work. It is a part of you. And this is where I think we lose the boundary between work and life. Because for those of us who have carved our own path, who have, unplugged from the proverbial matrix, who are committed to this creative life, and that might mean you've got a job. I'm like absolutely no judgment, but you feel like you're making up your own rules to play your own game. And we start to define what perfect actually looks like for us. And it has nothing to do about a result. It has everything to do with how we're showing up. I'm going to commit to this optimally for what I have available in this moment. And I don't even actually get to be in charge of what that looks like. I know when I feel it, and I know when I'm sustaining it, and I also know when it starts to fade. And rather than belittling, berating, and beating myself up or bullshitting myself into thinking I can sustain this, aka burnout, I'm going to call it because this is no longer my best. That is when we actually work to live rather than live to work. And you'll hear me say, when you run your own business, work is personal. And a lot of the times my clients get onto my calls and they say, I'm really sorry, this feels a lot more personal than it does like work related. I don't differentiate between the two. And I think it's because I am so committed to this process of continual improvement. And I think you are too, which is why you are still listening. And so I would, again, urge you to look at these boundaries for yourself and this concept of perfectionism, again, not as a limitation, but as permission to do it your way. And, and when I first started to understand what I'm really trying to do here in this new world business building and this 21st century concept of business. And, those are just kind of fun word plays with how do we create structure and support and these little metaverses where people are engaging in an activity in order to receive something in return. And right now we're going to talk about that as like work and salary. How do we do that in a way that reflects this dynamic approach, this paradox, right? And you get to even think about these things and contemplate this because you have gone this far on your journey. You're in that unknown greatness stage. And it stops becoming about loving your work. When I had millions of artists, that's an exaggeration, I didn't have millions. I had lots of artists hit me up for management, hit me up for production, hit me up for all sorts of different activities that I could do fairly well in the business side of things of music. And, my first was like, why? Why do you want to turn this into a monetary exchange? Because that then makes it work and not just art for art's sake, right? Which is just a completely different agreement we're going to be entering into here. The people I know who are able to take true art, let that be whatever the fuck you want it to be, and monetize it, they approached it like work. And most of us have a pretty romantic notion, myself very much included, around what creativity looks like. And when you turn it into work, it loses that luster. And that's not a bad thing. But the people who are able to make it a sustainable career for themselves were not enamored with the romanticism of creativity. I mean, they were, but like not in the way that I think we all initially in that unknown ignorance stage or even known ignorance stage approach it. They wake up at night with these ideas. It looks compulsive to other people. It looks unhealthy, perhaps, because we're willing to invest in this thing that actually doesn't have a guarantee. There isn't this promised return on your creative work, which is why this concept of perfectionism has shown up as limiting. It's dynamic, just like balance is a verb and boundaries are a verb. Perfectionism, perfect is a verb as well. And the last line I have on this, which I think is pretty funny, it's not about grind or grit or hustle harder. What that is for most people is our flow state because we've chosen creative work. And to any professional artist out there, again, let that mean to you whatever you want it to be. They will talk about it being torturous, but we think painting or singing or dancing or writing is so much more glamorous than cleaning a toilet or building a spreadsheet. But at the end of the day, whatever you create and what gives you that feeling of flow is your art. And that brings us to our fourth stage, my friends, knowing greatness. This is the pinnacle. This is mastery. At this stage, you trust your craft so deeply that you let go of the need for perfection. Your skill and your intuition work seamlessly together, creating something extraordinary. You're dead now. Just kidding. But seriously. This is when you start to slow down. And I'll link to this podcast, Shannon. It's David White and Tim Ferriss. This interview changed my life. And I only listened to it a week ago. So the jury is out. But to hear a master talk about their work and these stages, what I would suggest is this doesn't just happen once to you in your lifetime. This happens over and over again, kind of like Stephen Pressfield's The Artist's Journey. But you start to discern. You say no to people and projects. You say no to ideas and certainly output that isn't ready because you just know, K-N-O-W, not N-O. You have this level of discernment for perfect, right? And it's no longer about people pleasing or making yourself happy or acquiescing to the deadline or the date. You just K-N-O-W know this is perfect. This is ready to send. And you do this again because you just don't have a choice anymore. It's that intuitive wisdom that is being expressed into the world based on years of practice and experience. So when you think about a project you're on or an area of skill that you've been practicing, or even maybe a job that you're committed to, what stage do you think you're in right now? Unknown ignorance, known ignorance, unknown mastery, known mastery. What's holding you back from moving to the next stage? So we're in the final countdown. We all know perfectionism kills innovation, right? I think we've established that. The need for things to be just right can stifle experimentation. So people who are afraid of making mistakes are less likely to take creative risks. And just let that one sit for a second. Flaws create connection, and not just in making something relatable. Like I was talking about how I will acknowledge where I'm fucking up or where I recognize like this isn't my best because I don't know what that actually looks like yet. This is just where I'm at right now. It's relatable, sure, but it then helps you see you in this work. It gives you permission to do what you do at your best, knowing it will get better. People connect with humans, and we're inherently imperfect. That's the whole point of this experience, right? It's that contrast between like recognizing what we want and being very the fuck aware of where we are and the gap between the two. It's not unpolished and it's not untouchable. So when someone shows up in their vulnerability, how does that make you feel? Or when you perceive someone as being perfect and polished and presenting in such a manner, like, how does that feel for you? One of the pop culture books that I've refused to read because, what is it? Pathological demand avoidance. When everybody does a thing, I can't do it, but it's a good book. James Clear in Atomic Habits references a photography experiment where students were tasked with creating more photos rather than high quality work. And over time, those who focused on creating the perfect photo ultimately took less pictures. So the more often you are willing to create and embrace the imperfection, your skills are just going to grow naturally. So those who focused on quantity ended up taking higher quality photos in the long run. And those who focused on quality took less photos and therefore took longer to achieve that quote unquote high quality result. Okay, so how do you apply this? Firstly, and you'll hear me say this a million times, always just be willing to experiment or practice or recognize it is in the attempt that you get to show up however you want and just give it a go. I'm trying to avoid saying trying. See what I did there? Only because trying suggests like, I don't think this is going to work. And that's not exactly what I'm talking about here. Practice means I recognize I'm going to show up doing my best, and I'm excited for that to improve. That is a practice mindset. So instead of aiming for perfection, aim to show up consistently. I did another episode on consistency and the fallacy of consistency because it's not just 10,000 hours, right? It is how we show up every minute of each one of those hours. Set process goals not outcome goals. And I think this has been my biggest takeaway in this aha moment of like, maybe I am the gnarliest perfectionist that ever perfected. Rather than going, this is what I expect the end result to look like. It's like, how do I want to feel at the end of this hour? And you've heard me do this a million fucking times. See how I do that? Even that. I recognize I'm repeating myself. I feel bad about repeating myself because when someone repeats themselves to me, I assume they think it means I wasn't paying attention or they weren't paying attention. Anywho, I digress. I don't like repeating myself. I know you've probably heard me say this before. Therefore, I create that vulnerability. By setting a goal in terms of this is how I want to feel at the end of this, I can then embody that and embrace that in the moment. I want to feel so proud of myself. I can do that right fucking now. And then that means I've already succeeded. How do I approach this activity? Feeling like it's already fucking done, man. Focus on the effort and the learning rather than the end result. Finally, that allows you to celebrate your flaws. So when something doesn't turn out as planned, ask yourself, what made this different? What made this unique? How can I use this to tell a story? Oh my God, I joke about that all the time, right? Like, this is really good content. So the ultimate question is, are you willing to let go of this need for perfectionism in order to create something truly meaningful? The paradox being, can I release perfectionism in order to achieve perfect for right now? Can you find the courage to trust your craft, embrace the quirks, and lean into the journey rather than obsessing about the destination? The truth is, your best work won't come from being perfect. It will come from being present, being curious, and being real. Mic drop. So yeah, what you gonna do about it? Just commit to creating something imperfect. Like, it's an interesting, talk about paradox, like actually do something fucking sloppy and just see what happens. I'm going to make some protein balls. Oh my God. I'm going to make some protein balls. You know who you are. If you sent me that care package, it's my consigliere. Thank you. But maybe it's actually a piece of art. Maybe it's a conversation. Maybe it's a piece of content. Maybe it's your actual work. It's really interesting when you very purposefully, okay, story time. When I've worked with a lot of designers and creative directors, especially in agencies. And when you are pitching to clients and you have project-based work, there's always going to be a client that has to have the last word. They have to feel like they're getting their opinion incorporated into the final design and output. And what this can result in for anybody in this type of work, whether you're in a recording studio or a design house, is continual edits. And most of the time you've engaged with this contract, you've gotten paid potentially 50 to 75% up front. You might not get paid until the end. And so now you're finding yourself doing all of this extra work in order to make this client happy, who is quote unquote never going to be happy, right? But the reality is they just want to have that final say. And a very seasoned designer told me they show up and present, they do their final presentation with it being 70% done. They know that font is sloppy. They know that take wasn't the best take. They know that there's going to be a grading or an edit that this client is going to demand at the 11th hour. So they purposefully show up with quote unquote sloppy work, their definition of sloppy, and the final edits, so that when that client goes, actually, I think we need to try it like this, or we should be using that font, or we should be trying this grade, they're like, oh, do you mean like this? Beep, boop, bop, boop, beep, 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 tapping. In my studio, we actually had a box that we put like bells and whistles on and like flips and switches and a big knob. And when the artist would be like, I think we need to hear a little bit more 600 in the bass line, we'd be like, do, 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 do. And then we'd hit play on the exact same fucking track. And the artist was like, oh yeah, man, that's it. Great work. Great. That's you heard exactly what I had to say there. You read my mind. Like, turn it in a little bit sloppy. Let that final judge have their say and give yourself the space to actually realize that expectation rather than overworking and overcompensating to like create it in real time with them. Anywho, commit to creating something imperfect, whether it's a piece of writing or a conversation or an even Instagram post. Let it be flawed. Let it be authentically you in that moment. Send it, publish it, share it, tag me. Let me see it. I'd love to see it. So yeah, that's it. That's all I got to say about perfectionism. Quality control, creativity for today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up. And you know all the things. You know what to do. I love you.